We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 31b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the Machlokas Tanoim in the Mishnah. Let's say a person is mushba mi piatzmo by Shevuos Ha'edus, meaning he takes the Shevuah on his own, but he does that outside of court. So is that considered a violation of Shevuos Ha'edus, and the person is liable? Rabbi Meir says that the person is liable in such a case, even though it was not in front of court. But by mushba mi piatzmo, we say the person is liable, and the Chachamim say no. Even by mushba mi piatzmo, it has to be in front of the court. And the Gemara wanted to know what exactly is the root of the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, and the Rabbanan said in front of Rav Papa that the issue is whether don mina umina or don mina v'yuki bi'asra. According to Rabbi Meir, we say don mina umina, which means we totally learn from Shevuos HaPikadon. There's a gezerah shava between Shevuos Ha'edus and Shevuos HaPikadon, just like by Shevuos HaPikadon, mushba mi piatzmo is chayiv, and the chayiv is outside of Bezdin. The same is true by Shevuos Ha'edus, mushba mi piatzmo is chayiv, and the chayiv is even outside of Bezdin. But the Rabbanan say that don mina v'uki bi'asra, we learn from Shevuos HaPikadon that mushba mi piatzmo is chayiv, but then we have to place it in the context of Shevuos Ha'edus. By Shevuos Ha'edus, we only find that you're chayiv in Bezdin, not outside of Bezdin, and therefore mushba mi piatzmo is also only going to be chayiv in Bezdin. That was the Rabbanan's explanation. This was the Rabbanan that were sitting before Rav Papa. Amar lu Rav Papa, so the Gemara now says, Rav Papa said to them, he said to the Rabbanan, imi pikadon gamri la Rabbanan, dekuli alma lo pligi de don mina umina. If we were really learning from Shevuos HaPikadon to Shevuos Ha'edus, then there would actually be no machlokas. The Rabbanan would also agree that don mina umina. In other words, they would agree that we learn from Shevuos HaPikadon entirely, and we would say even outside of Bezin, mushba mi piatzmo es chayev when it comes to Shevuos Ha'edus. Elahainu taima de Rabbanan. Rather, the reason of the Rabbanan has nothing to do with don mina umina, don mina v'yuki bi'asra. Rather, the reason is as follows: Demaisi lo bekal v'chomer. They actually just make a kal v'chomer within Shevuos Ha'edus itself, and the kal v'chomer is as follows: Umami pi acherim chayiv. If the person is chayiv, if he's liable when he's administered the oath from others, mi pi atzmo lo kol shekain. So certainly he's going to be chayiv if he takes the oath on his own. Umi demaisu lo mi kal v'chomer. And since the Rabbanan are learning it from a kal v'chomer, so then we apply the rule dayo lovu min hadin lios kanidon. When you're learning something out, it cannot go further than the source that you're learning from. And the source over here is mushba mi pi acherim. Ma mushba mi pi acherim bebezdin in shalo bebezdin lo. Just like by mushba mi pi acherim, when the oath is administered by others, there's only a liability in court and not outside of the court. Af mushba mi piatzmo, so too when the person takes the oath on his own, bifnei bezin in shalo bifnei bezin lo, there's only going to be a liability in front of the court and not outside of the court. But the Gemara continues, Amru le Rabbanan le Rav Papa. The Rabbanan said to Rav Papa, Mi motzis amrit de lav bedon mino mina pligi. Can you really say that there's no machlokas in terms of don mina umina versus don mina v'yuka bi'asra? We do find such a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in the Mishnah coming up. V'atanan, but we learn in the Mishnah coming up, Gabe pikadon, by Shevuos HaPikadon, the Mishnah says as follows: Shevuos HaPikadon oheges ba'anashim u'v'nashim. Shevuos HaPikadon applies to men and women. Barachokin u'v'krovin, it applies to non-relatives and relatives. Biksheir nuvapsulin, it applies to those who are kosher and those who are disqualified from testifying. Bifnei bezin v'shalo bifnei bezin, it applies in front of the court and not in front of the court. Mi pi atzmo, if you're talking about when the shvuah is taken on his own. Umi pi acherim eino chayav ad sheyichbor bo bebezin, but if it's administered by others, then there's only going to be a liability if he denies it in the court. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. V'chachamim omer, and the chachamim say, bein mi pi atzmo, vein mi pi acherim. It doesn't matter if he takes it on his own. It doesn't matter if he takes it if it's administered from others. Kevon shekafar bo chayiv, once he denies it, he is liable, and so therefore the Rabbanan in front of Rav Papa, they argue as follows: Mushba mi pi acherim bepikadon. This idea that when by pikadon there can be a shvuah that's administered by others and there's a liability, minoluhu l'Rabbanan dechayiv. From where do the Rabbanan get this idea that a person is chayiv in that case? Lav de gamri la me'edus. Over there you have to say it's learned from Shevuos Ha'edus. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Ushma mino, and therefore you see from this mission over here, bedon mino mina pligi, that they are arguing about don mino mina. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment. And the Gemara says, me'ahi in meha leko l'mashma mina. Actually, that's true. From the Mishnah coming up, yes, you do see a machlokas in terms of don mino mina, but the point over here is that from this Mishnah, from our Mishnah, you don't necessarily see that. And Rashi explains, Lav de Gamri la Me'edus, again, don't they learn it from Shevuos HaEdus? Isn't Shevuos HaPikadon learned from Shevuos HaEdus in terms of an oath that's administered by others? The point over here is as follows. By Shevuos HaPikadon, the pasuk itself, it says that the person takes a false Shvuah. That sounds like he's taking the Shvuah on his own. So that's already found in the pasuk. The question is, where do we learn when it's administered by others? Now, in this case, we cannot resort to the same Kal V'chomer that Rav Papa mentioned when it comes to Shevuos HaEdus, Devadai mushba mipi atzmo chamor mi mushba mipi acherim, because everybody agrees that certainly mushba mipi atzmo is stricter than mushba mipi acherim. So therefore, just because you have a liability by mushba mipi atzmo, it does not mean that you're going to have a liability by mushba mipi acherim through a Kal V'chomer. Ela migzera shava gamri la me'edus. It has to be that we're learning from gzera shava from edus when it comes to mushba mipi acherim by Shevuos HaPikadon. Umidachaya bebezin v'shalo bebezin. Now, from the fact that the Chachamim are saying, the Chachamim in this case are the ones that say that there's a liability in Bezin and outside of Bezin, Alma don mina v'uki bi'asra svirlu. You see that the Chachamim hold, again, don mina v'uki bi'asra. They're saying that we learn Shevuos HaPikadon from Shevuos HaEdus, but we have to put it in the context of Shevuos HaPikadon where it doesn't have to be in front of Bezdin. Me'achar she'veisa mipi acherim l'chlal Shevuos HaPikadon hamideyu b'torah Shevuos HaPikadon. Once you're saying there's a concept of administer the oath by others by Shevuos HaPikadon, that's mipi acherim by Shevuos HaPikadon, you learn it in the context of Shevuos HaPikadon. She'ein Shevuah bebezin mefurash ba. You don't find anything about a Shevuah bebezin that's explicit by Shevuos HaPikadon. And so then the Gemara said, Me'ahi in, from there, yes, Me'ahi vadai shaminan l'hul rabbanon don mina v'yuki bi'asra. It's true. From the later Mishnah, we do see that the rabbanon hold don mina v'yuki bi'asra. Avo Me'ahi pluksa, but from our machlokas over here by Shevuos HaEdus, lo hava shaminali, we don't necessarily see that, because again, as we said, it could be the rabbanon really learn it over here from a Kal V'chomer. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'chayavin al zadon hashvua." When it comes to Shevuos HaEdus is unique that the carbon, there's a liability to the carbon specifically when it's done on purpose. And the Gemara says, "Menahani mili." From where do we know this? The Tana Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught, "Bechula nemar bohen v'nelam." By all of the other cases, meaning all of the other cases of carbon olav yored, whether it be Shevuos bitoy or Tomas mikdosh v'kadashav, it says the word v'nelam. V'nelam again means there was a lapse of awareness. V'kan lo nemar bo v'nelam. Here it doesn't say the word v'nelam. L'chayiv ala mezid kashogig. That's what it means to say that the person is liable for doing a b'mezid, just like b'shogig. That's why there's a liability for mezid over here. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. V'al shigagasa im zadon ha'edus. The Mishnah also said not only on regular b'mezid, but also let's say there was a shogeg together with mezid when it comes to the testimony. That's what the Mishnah said, that there's a liability there as well. The Gemara says hechi dami shigagasa im zadon ha'edus. What exactly do we mean by shogeg, but there's zadon when it comes to the testimony? Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Be'omer, Yodeya Anisha Shvuah Zu Asur. The case would be as follows. The person says, I know that this Shvuah is forbidden, Aval Eini Yodeya Im Chayavin Ala Karban Imlo, but I don't know that there's a liability to a carbon or not, so there's somewhat mezid over here, but there's also somewhat shogeg in terms of the knowledge of the carbon. There's a liability by Shevuos HaEdus. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ve'in chayavin al shigagasa greidasa. Let's say it's only a shogeg, so then there is no carbon by Shevuos HaEdus. And the Gemara says, Leimwa tanina l'Rav Kahana u'Ravasi. Let us say that our Mishnah is just teaching us the same thing that we learned by Rav Kahana and Ravasi. Now that was by Shevuos bitoy. Rashi over here says, Leimwa tanina l'Rav Kahana Ravasi. Dehecha desavar l'ishava be'emes eino chayev. The case over there was that Rav Kahana and Ravasi, they heard something from Rav, and they each took a Shevuah to what they heard, and one of them happened to be wrong. And the question is, if there's a liability over there, and Rav said that it's a complete onus in that situation. And so the Gemara really here is asking that over there they were in doubt, and Rav had to tell them, oh, you're not liable to a carbon because you just made a mistake, ba'onus, it was something out of your control. But that doesn't make any sense. Why do they not know the answer if the answer is right here in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah seems to be saying by Shevuos HaEdus that if there's a shogeg, a full shogeg, that's considered like an onus. It's considered out of one's control. So that's why the Gemara is saying, Lema Tanina l'Rav Kahana with Ravasi. Are we saying that there's a Mishnah to the exact issue that Rav Kahana and Ravasi weren't sure about? And the Gemara says, Lo, no, Afagav Ditnan, even though it's in our Mishnah over here by Shevuos HaEdus, Itzrich, it's still necessary. They still needed to debate it by Shevuos Bitoy. Because Salka Daitachamina, because one might have thought, Hakohu Delo Ksiv Vinelam. Over here, it doesn't say the word Vinelam, like we said, by Shevuos HaEdus, it never says that there was a lapse of awareness. Devo'inan Shogeg Dumya de Mezin. And so therefore, the Shogeg needs to be similar to Mezin, and if it's a total Shogeg, it's essentially treated like an onus. Aval Hasan, but over there by Shevuos Bitoy, the Chsiv Vinelam, where it says the word Vinelam, Afilo Shigagasa Kaldu, even if it's any amount of shogeg, we would say that qualifies for a carbon. That's why they weren't sure. So Kamash Malon, that's what was being taught by that discussion between Rav Kahana, Rav Asi, and Rav, that in that situation we say libcha anoscha, we say it's considered an onus. Rashi says afagav detanan haigabe edus, even though over here we say by edus that it's considered like an onus. Itzrich Rav Lameimar nami gabe bitoy. Rav needs to say that that's true by Shavuos bitoy as well, because shkaga koldu, because again over there any amount of shkaga ve'afilu onus belibo nechayev, even if it was onus belibo, even if the person really thought what he was saying was true. So again, one might have thought that afilu shigagasa koldu, who is going to be chayiv since it says v'nelam over there, and that's kamash malon. That's what Rav was teaching, that there's no liability in that case. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shevuos ha'edus ketzad, how does Shevuos ha'edus work? Amar l'shnayim, let's say he says to two people, bo'u v'ha'iduni, come and testify for me. And then Shevuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha edus, let's say they take an oath that we don't know any testimony. O she'amru lo, or let's say they just say to him, ein anu yodin l'cha edus, we don't know any testimony for you. And then mashbiya ani aleichem, he says, I'm going to administer an oath to you. V'yamru amen, and they say the word amen. Harei elu chayavin. In these cases, they are liable. This is a situation where they took a false shvuah, and again, in their false shvuah, they said they didn't know testimony, but they really did. And the Mishnah continues, Hishbiya aleim chamesh pa'amim chutz lebezin. Let's say he administers an oath to them 5 times outside of court. Ubo lebezin v'hodu, and then they come to court and they admit peturin. So in that case, they're going to be exempt. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Kafru, now if they deny it, chayovin al kol achas v'achas. So then they're going to be chayiv. This is talking about denial in court. Then they're going to be chayiv on each one. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment. Hishbiya alein hey pa'amim bifnei bezdin. Let's say he administers an oath to them 5 times in front of court. The kafru, and they deny it, and chayav and ala achas, they're only chayav 1. Rabbi Shimon says, Matam, what's the reason for this? Hoel ve'enam yecholin lachzor lahodus, because now they can't retract and admit. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment. Kafru shnein ke'echad. Now let's say it's 2 witnesses we're talking about. Let's say they both deny knowing testimony at the same time. So then shnein chayav, and then they're both chayav in terms of Shavuos ha'edus. But zeh achar zeh, let's say they deny one after the other. First one witness denies it, and then the second. So harishon chayav, the first one is liable because it was through his denial that now he's making this person lose out. V'hasheni pater, but the second one, at that point in time, he's already only one witness, and so therefore when he denies it, it's not considered a denial that gives him liability. That's why he's exempt. Kafar echad v'hoda echad. Let's say one of the witnesses denies knowing anything, but the other one admits. So hakofar chayiv, the one denying, is the one that will be liable. Hayu shtei kitei edim. Now let's say there were 2 sets of edim. Kafar harishon, if the first set deny, v'achar kach kafar hashni, and then the second set deny, so then shtein chayavos, then they're both liable. Mimnei shal edos yicholo lehiskayim b'shtein, because both of them, each set, is able to allow the testimony to go forward, so the denial is meaningful, and that's why they are both liable. And Rashi explains, Osha Amru Lo, again the Mishnah said, if they either take a Shevuot that they don't know, or let's say they just say to him that they don't know any testimony below Shevuot. They say it without an oath. They say, Ein anu yodin l'chaydus. They just say, we don't know any testimony. V'yamar lehem, and he says to them, Mashbi'eni aleichem sheyeh emes. I want to administer an oath to you that what you're saying is true. Masha martim, what you're saying is actually emes. V'yamru amen, and they say the word amen chayav, and then they're liable. Avolim shasku achar ha-Shevuot. But let's say they're just silent after the oath. Ein kan kabol ha-Shevuot. That's not accepting a Shevuah. If he says, I want to administer an oath, and they're silent, that would not be the same as if they say amen. If they say amen, that's like taking an oath, and then they would be liable. Ubo lebezdin v'hodu peturin. And then the Mishnah said, if they come to court and they admit, this is talking about where the oath is administered outside of the court, and then they come to court and admit, v'afilu kafru chutz lebezdin al kol shvuah, even if they deny on every shvuah, they deny it outside of bezdin, she'ein kfira chutz lebezdin. There is no denial outside of court. Kidim efarish b'gemara. In this, the Gemara is going to explain. So again, that's in the case of Hishbiya aleim chamesh pa'amim chutz lebezin. They then come to bezin and they admit they're going to be pater in that case. And then the Mishnah said, kafru, if they deny, chayavin al kol achas v'achas, they're chayav in each one. Rashi explains that case, kafru bebezdin, let's say they deny in court, chayavin al kol achas v'achas, they're chayav on each one, tekfira akula kaima, because the denial is going on all of them. V'alfinan mikra v'hoya ki yesham la'achas me'ela, l'chayav al kol achas v'achas. This is also learned out later in the Gemara. It says in the pasuk le'achas me'ela, we understand there's a liability for each and every one. And the idea over here in this case is that, again, there was a shvua outside of Bezin 5 times, but then when they come to Bezin, they don't admit, rather they deny it, so then the denial goes on each case, and that's where they're liable in each and every case. And then the Mishnah said, Matam, what's the reason? And this was going on the case of the Mishnah, which said, let's say he's mashbiya them 5 times in court and they deny, so then they're actually only liable 1. And Rabbi Shimon says, what's the reason? The reason is because they're not able to admit at this point in time. Matam ein chayavin ela achas. Why are they only liable to 1? Afilu shasku v'kafru levasof, even if they're silent and then deny at the end. V'lo amrinon kfira kaima kula. We don't say in this situation the denial goes on all the cases. Hoel ven yechon lachzor lahodas, because in this case they're not able to admit again. They can't retract and admit. Ilu kafru b'rishona. If they denied it at first, hoelu bebezinhem, since they're in bezin, shuvlo hayu ru'uyin lahayit. At that point in time, they're no longer able to testify. Shekvar higidu, because once you testify, you can't go back and change it. Shekvar higidu she'enon yodim lo edus. They already said that they don't know any testimony. V'shuv eno chozro magid. The rule is kevan shegad shuv eno chozro magid. Once they testify, they can't retestify. Hilkach, therefore, alfagav de lo kafru ela levasof. Even though the denial was only at the end, kol hashvuos hayu levatala chutz min harishona. All of the oaths that they took, they're all considered nothing except for the first one. Shem shasku barishona kfiri. If they were silent in the beginning, it's considered a denial. Shuv einon ru'uyim lahashbiyan. You can't give any more shavuos. V'im einom kfira harei mushboin v'yomden. And if not for the denial, so then they're already taking the shvua. Umazeh shvua al shvua. What's a shvua on another shvua? V'al karchach ki chasav liachas l'chayev al kolachas v'achas. So you have to say that when it says the word liachas that we learned above to be liable in every single one, ashvua chutz lebezin v'kafru bebezin chasav. That's going on the scenario like we said above, where the shvua was done outside of court and the denial was in court. The shvuos chutz lebezin shayim ashbiyan, because when he gave them those oaths outside of court, sheyavo lebezin v'yoidu, that they should come to court and testify, lo yatzu levatola, those were not for nothing. Re'uyos lachalik, those you can divide up into different liabilities. Sharei afilu kafru sham brishona, because even if they denied over there at first, hayaroi lachzor lashbiyan, he'd be able to give another shvua. So therefore, you don't have the rule of kevan shigad shuvay nechozor magid in that situation, and that's why over there we say that there's a liability each time. Kafru shnein ka'achas besoch kedei dibor. Now, if besoch kedei dibor, within a few seconds of each other, they both denied together, so then we say they are both chayiv. Let's say it's one denies and then the other. Harishon chayiv, the first one is liable, aval hasheni potter, but the second is potter. Shekevan shekafar harishon, once the first one denies, shuv ein eid yechidi roy lahagid. So you just have one witness left. One witness is nothing, and therefore that second witness is not going to be liable. And the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Ra'u sheratzach harein. Let's say the witnesses, they see that the plaintiff is running after them. Amru lo, they say to him, Ma'ato ratzach harein, what are you running after us for? Shavuos she'einanu yoden l'cha edus, we take an oath, we don't know any testimony for you. So in that case, Peturin, they are exempt ad sheyishmu mipiv, until they hear from his mouth. Rashi says, ad sheyishmu mipiv bo'u v'hayiduni, they have to hear him say, come and testify for me. Only in that situation are they liable by shvuas or edus. The Gemara says, my kamashmalan, what is this teaching us? Tanina, we already learned this in a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah coming up. Shilach bi'ad avdo. Let's say the plaintiff sends the message in the hands of his servant. Rashi says, Shilach bi'ad avdo hatovea hishbiyan bi'ad avdo. The servant comes and has them take an oath. O sha'amar len hanitba, or let's say the person, the defendant, the other litigant, he says to them, Mashbiya ani aleichem, I'm going to give you an oath, Shem hatem yodim lo edus, that if you know testimony for him, for the plaintiff, shetavov utiyiduhu, that you should come and testify for him. So harei elu peturim, in these cases, they are potter, because again, it's not the toveya who said bo v'hayiduni. Rashi says, Shem hatem yodim lo edus levaldino, if you know testimony for the other litigant, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph.